Hey guys, it's Paul, combat veteran, MMA fighter, YouTuber, and today we are checking out the Templin Institute's Fall of Cadia, one of the biggest events in the 40k universe. Let's get into it.
Templin Institute. Skillshare for sponsoring this investigation into the fortress world of Cadia. The first 500 people to use the link in the description.
I gotta love, the Templin Institute has the highest production value, like intros.
In the region of Imperial space designated Segmentum Obscurus, there lies an anomaly that has come to be known as the Eye of Terror. It is an enormous rift, a permanent storm in the fabric of reality that for 11,000 years has provided a gateway to the nightmarish realm of the warp. Inside is a dimension of madness and despair, where skies weep blood, ancient stars burn in multicolored flares, and the whims of the dark gods hold sway. Since the time of the Horus Heresy, the forces of chaos that reside within have attempted to break out from the Eye of Terror and strike at the millions of...
I'm sort of curious because I know the Emperor, right, his psychic energy at least, is holding back chaos and demons from entering Terra via the webway. But is Cadia just too far away, the Eye of Terror too far away from the physical Emperor, that he can't stop them, or is his energy devoted entirely to plugging up the webway and it can't also extend towards blocking the Eye of Terror? It's, again, I mean, it's the warp, so I recognize that it doesn't have any obligation to follow any meaningful logic, but I'm just curious if the lore experts, if an explanation is addressed in the lore.
Of worlds that lay beyond. Only one thing has stood in their path. A fortress world that guarded the only navigable route to the Eye of Terror. A place where time and time again, the servants of the dark gods would break against the greatest defenders of man. It was a planet known as Cadia, and it was here above all that the bloody work of the Imperium was done. A terrestrial world closely resembling Holy Terra before the age of the Imperium, Cadia was marked by great oceans, temperate plains, windswept moors, and towering mountains. Cadia was colder than most civilized worlds, yet not enough to impede the planet's settlement. It was famous across the galaxy for its sparkling glaciers and thick pine forests. It was the planet's network of strange black monoliths that remained Cadia's most enduring mystery, however, known across the galaxy as the Cadian Pylons. When precisely Cadia was first colonized has been lost to antiquity, but in the decades before the Horus Heresy, it had become inhabited by a primitive race of violet-eyed humans who worshipped the Chaos Gods. The Word-Bearers Legion and their Primarch, Lorgar Aurelian, was the first to re-establish contact with Cadia, but whatever transpired in these initial meetings might never be known.
Yeah, I'm curious, like, before... So, if the pylons of Cadia impeded chaos from pouring out through the Eye of Terror or contained it from expanding, then how did the residents of Cadia before the Horus Heresy encounter the Chaos Gods, right? Is it just like, were the pylons, like, kind of limiting their range? And I also don't understand why pre-Horus Heresy chaos didn't just spill out then, right? Why did they wait until after the Emperor showed up to really start to ratchet up their campaign to break into normal space?
Lorgar ordered the cyclonic bombardment of the planet, wiping out the native Cadians and whatever secrets they possessed. With the end of the Horus Heresy, the Word-Bearers and their other traitor legions fled to the Eye of Terror to heal their wounds and nurture their hatred. Black Crusades mounted across the galaxy from the Eye of Terror convinced the Imperium that Cadia was of vital strategic importance, and settlers were sent to the world to claim it in the name of the Emperor.
Okay, so it wiped out all the colonists and was just an empty world, And then eventually the Imperium deliberately was like, no, we're going to build a fortress here. Okay.
Cadia was eventually forged into a world worthy of the Imperium, but it was learned at great cost that the planet would forever be threatened, and its entire society would have to reflect that. Its earliest cities were constructed in the traditional style emulating Holy Terra, but the broad avenues and ordered urban grids favored any attacking force, and sweeping changes were enacted.
That's actually interesting because the city of Washington, D.C. in the USA, that is similar to the story of that city, right? It was designated as the capital as kind of a neutral area outside of the control of any one state, but it was originally designed in a very clean, orderly way. But in the War of 1812, because it was so navigable, it was easy for invading forces to go from central, essential part seat of government and destroy building by building the fledgling United States key government functions. And so, after the War of 1812, the city was designed in such a way to be vastly more confusing and idiosyncratic. The streets were named after states. There were cross streets that had very similar names. There were a series of roundabouts that looked very similar. And it serves, of course, to make driving there an absolute hellacious nightmare. But God help anyone trying to invade the city of DC by ground. Of course, it's sort of silly now in the era of GPS and ICBMs and aircraft that it's not that hard to navigate. But again, you have to think in, say, the 1810s, right? Invading forces, if they were lucky, would maybe be able to study a map of the city they were trying to invade before having to march through its streets.
Cadia could not afford any distinction between its fortresses and cities. Streets were constructed in such a way as to disorient any potential invader, arrayed in zigzag patterns that would force an enemy to fight for every block. Bastions and local garrisons were stationed in every corner and spire that possessed a commanding view, while at the heart of every city was an enormous fortification known in the local dialect as a casser. From the air, these resembled intricate puzzles, which could be held for months, if not years, even if the surrounding city had been taken. Its people were no different than its buildings, reorganized into a society wholly devoted to the defense of their world. Every Cadian was taught the skills necessary to become a soldier from the moment they could walk. Tactical doctrine was prioritized above basic literacy, and every citizen was required to serve at least a 4-year term in the planet's military before either becoming a career soldier or instead joining Cadia's military-industrial complex.
Yeah, I always think it's funny when people view things like literacy as incompatible with military service. This is, of course, sort of ridiculous because the ability to read and understand written, say, instructions, written battle plans is absolutely essential. One of the things that's interesting is that when the United States began to work with and try to raise the Afghan army after they kicked out the Taliban, one of the problems they kept running into is that Afghan soldiers were not literate. And it became such a problem that they had to add extensive reading and writing courses to Afghan military basic training. And doing so allowed them to, for example, read the label on boxes of equipment. It enabled them to follow simple written instructions. It allowed them to read, say, the dashboard of their vehicles. Even basic literacy is so essential to military operations that to neglect it in favor of, say, using a rifle is sort of ridiculous. I mean, again, think about it. Let's say you could teach someone to read, or you could teach someone to clean their rifle. Well, if you teach someone to read, then you can hand them directions on how to clean their rifle, and as long as the process is simple enough, then teaching them to read has effectively taught them to clean their rifle. Again, learning how to learn is more powerful than teaching many individual types of tasks.
Even the wealthy and successful elite wore clothing reminiscent of the camouflage patterns issued to the lowliest guardsmen. The famed Cadian shock troops were widely regarded as the best soldiers in the Imperial Guard, and some of the most well-equipped. Regiments either formed on Cadia or those emulating its style and doctrine could be found across the entire galaxy. Cadian equipment, in particular, was so ubiquitous that it was nearly the standard of the entire Astra Militarum. For millennia, the planet stood as an unshakable foundation that challenged the will of the dark gods themselves. Every invasion was shattered, and every Black Crusade was repelled. But in the 999th year of the 41st millennium...
What is sort of interesting, too, is that, again, Cadia must also have a tremendous port, a tremendous fleet presence, right? Because logically, if Cadia is only a well-equipped ground force planet, then it could just be bypassed via ships, right? It has to have a comparably powerful navy. In fact, a navy so powerful that it is more efficient to destroy or invade Cadia than it is to just bypass it, or to fight only the spaceborne navy. But of course, that would mean that Cadia would also have to have this tremendously awesome naval shipyard and naval industry. Again, I'm saying the word navy, I mean space navy, obviously. So I'm sort of curious as to, again, the mechanics there, if there's a lore explanation as to why Cadia had to be the net that catches all of these, again, spaceborne chaos invasions.
Cadia was finally broken. Abaddon the Despoiler, greatest champion of chaos since Horus himself, launched the 13th Black Crusade. In the opening moments, elements of the Planetary Guard turned traitor, assassinating Cadia's high command, its governor, and Lord Castellan. A reformed defense now under the command of Ursarkar E. Creed were able to contain this initial assault, but the Black Crusade was just beginning. In orbit of the planet, an enormous Chaos Armada traded blows with the warships of Battlefleet Cadia, all while reinforcements swept across Cadia's skies before joining in battle against the planet's beleaguered defenders.
Okay, so yeah, it seems like a case of somehow if you could seize the Cadian planet, then the battle fleet that relies on it, probably for support and personnel and equipment and ammunition, without that, then the battle fleet will quickly crumble. Again, otherwise you would just devote all of your resources to fighting the battle fleet and ignoring the planet below. What's also, of course, I appreciate is that the 13th Black Crusade started with an attack on Cadia's leadership. And that is a very modern strategic choice, one that, of course, the U.S. used famously in the initial invasion of Iraq and even the Gulf War, using the, at the time, new technology of smart or guided bombs and weapons. The U.S. targeted Iraqi leaders and Iraqi leaders' ability to communicate, right? Their goal was to paralyze subordinate units by depriving them of orders. Now, of course, this only works if you have a military structure that is very, very rigid. And it assumes that a Cadian platoon, a Cadian company, a Cadian regiment will stop or freeze in the absence of orders. And that's, again, when you have highly trained officers and non-commissioned officers at every level, that actually doesn't necessarily happen, right? Good militaries have lots and lots of layers of command. You could take out the supreme commander, but if his deputy knows his battle plans, has access to them, and is competent and highly trained, then destroying the leadership isn't the decisive blow you might think it would be. And again, this is also true if you say take out a regimental commander, but their subordinate brigade commanders all have a strong sense of the plan, an understanding of how they need to operate, and the empowerment to take initiative, right? So instead of freezing their entire regiment by killing its commander, all you've done is slightly disrupted the headquarters operations. Then that leadership targeting is not necessarily the best strategy. But again, if you told me that Chaos operates in that way, Chaos having a ultra strict hierarchy in which no one does anything without explicit orders from the top, that wouldn't actually shock me.
Mysteriously, it was not the famous fortress cities of Cadia that appeared to be Abaddon's primary target, but rather the large network of pylons, particularly those within the Elysian Fields. What precisely happened there can only be guessed at, but some claim that for a brief moment, servants of the Imperium working with ancient Xenos managed to activate the Cadian pylons. The forces of Chaos were seemingly cut off from the warp, and even the Eye of Terror was said to shrink. By the order of Abaddon, however, an enormous blackstone fortress struck Cadia with the force of an artificial meteor. The planet's continents were split apart, its ancient forests burned away. The few who managed to evacuate the dying world bore witness not only to the destruction of Cadia, but to the expansion of the Eye of Terror across the entire galaxy. With the fall of Cadia, the forces of Chaos had won a victory that for millennia had been almost unimaginable. Tendrils of the warp have split the galaxy in two, and there is little doubt that the Imperium has entered the time of ending. But the ultimate triumph of Abaddon the Despoiler still eludes him. The fall of Cadia has awakened something in the Imperium more powerful than even its greatest fortress. A hunger for retribution has swept across every world, and Cadia has become a martyr whose memory has spurred humanity to ever greater feats of valor.
And it also seems to have coincided with the awakening of our boy Robute Guilliman, right? Someone who is probably, of all the Primarchs, maybe one of the most qualified to lead the Imperium, which he has done. And with his, now ultra Marines, the Primaris Marines, he is, trying to reunify the galaxy. Still not, I don't know, is it specified in lore? Can you reclose this giant chaos rift? I assume the Necron technology, right? The Necrons seem to have some sort of technology to contain the warp. I guess it's just a question of can it be implemented? Again, it's Games Workshop will write something. But Games Workshop also has shown they have a total willingness to have their universes undergo a total apocalypse and to restart them. So who knows, man?
If a creature like Abaddon is still capable of experiencing even a tinge of fear, then he must be haunted by the fact that in destroying Cadia, he has added 1 trillion fallen saints to the highest pantheon of the Imperium. For even as the planet split apart and its shattered remnants were consumed by the Eye of Terror, the red streaks of firing lasguns could still be seen in the darkness.
Dun dun dun. R.I.P. to the legend, Cadia.
Defenders of Cadia refusing to give in, even as their world cracked and burned around them. From their sacrifice has arisen a new battle cry, one shouted in hatred from the Arctic steppes of Valhalla to the deadly jungles of Catachan. A simple phrase that ensures the memory of Cadia will remain for as long as humanity endures. The planet broke before the guard.
You mean a meme? All right, let's be honest here. This is a meme. I thought it was Cadia Stands. That's the one I keep hearing. Brought to us by Skillshare. All right, guys, that was pretty awesome. I have a lot more questions about the Fall of Cadia now. I really wish they had the time to go into way deeper detail about the tactics, the battles, the strategy, why they did one thing or another. It's interesting to me. First off, I really want to know why. Maybe the pylons had always been the target, but why the 13th Crusade did they go after those pylons, right? Did they always have a function? Again, very curious to know. If you know a good source for Necron lore that kind of breaks this down, I would love to know about it. Let me know in the comments. Also, if you too keep Cadia in your heart, check out the merch store. I actually have a cool mashup of Cadia Stands in the style of a popular soft drink that you may recognize, but is not officially copyright infringement. It's parody. I'm protected by parody law. Other than that, guys, check out the second channel, the Instagram, the merch store where I have tons of stuff, cool mugs, fun stickers, shirts, tanks, and yeah, until next time, I will see you guys later.